to everyone for joining us today for Community Conversations. We were really delighted and excited when Dr. Mirza Taha Salah Mustafa approached us with this idea.
You're breaking up. I don't know if you could hear me or not.
When they approached me with the idea of, and Dr. McGee, to have a community conversation about social justice in Islam. And so with that, I will just pass it to Dr. Mirza. I believe you're the first speaker, correct?
Correct. Thank you so much for this opportunity. We love engaging with our colleagues in general, and this is another great opportunity. So thank you for joining us. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. We wanted to sort of change the idea of how we talk about Islam. Usually we do like FAQ sessions. We've talked a bunch about Islamophobia in the last couple of years. So we wanted to actually take the positive steps now. And honestly, even before we sort of came up with the idea of this topic, we weren't really sure what the future held, but it is now even a more appropriate topic to discuss in the light of the current affairs that are going on in our country, and the dilemmas and the crossroads that we face in terms of social justice and race relations in general. So we have a really nice panel. As we go, people can introduce themselves. I'll present the first few ideas here, and then we'll have an opportunity at the end to answer questions and have a discussion. So all of us will take about 5 minutes to talk, and then we'll move on. So here's the agenda. We're going to just talk about the concept of justice in Islam, and then we're going to cover race, gender, our responsibility towards the poor and needy, and also education opportunity equality that is espoused in Islam. So Islam has a very, very mature and advanced thought process when it comes to justice, and especially when it comes to social justice. The governance and the guidance in Islam come from the Quran, which is the holy text, which is really for us the divine word of God, and we treat it as such. And then also from collections of hadiths, which are sort of how the Prophet Muhammad lived his life, how he interpreted the Quran, how he exemplified the teachings of the Quran. So I just have a verse here, and I'm not going to read the whole verse for you. This is just a translation of a verse from the Quran. And basically, it's sort of saying from God that we should be persistently standing in justice, even if it's against ourselves or our parents and our relatives. So it's delving us a pretty high bar to what justice is. And God is telling us whether one is rich or poor, it doesn't really matter. God is worthy of both. So this is sort of one of the bases. This verse is used as one of the bases of what is our ask in terms of what is justice. So, it's telling us to be upright, to have justice come first. And God is giving us example of relationships that we hold really dear, like to ourselves and to our parents and to our relatives. And it's, teaching us that those relationships do not supersede any concept of justice. So even things that are close to us, when it comes to things that are just, it should supersede, those concepts should supersede it. So if we always think about our own predispositions when we're trying to correct biases in ourselves, whatever we're doing, and we're saying, okay, well, this is how I feel, or this is how my parents taught me. That's not always the best standard. It's a good standard, and we obviously appreciate our parents and our teachers. But even then, if the standard is higher, if what we understand to be just is different, we should not side by it. We're wrong to think that holding on to tradition is better than holding on to what is upright. There's another verse from the Quran. And again, God is telling us that even don't let a hatred of a people prevent you from being just. Be just, and that is nearer to righteousness, and have God consciousness around it. So again, the bar is really high, and this is a very high standard to restrain and to tolerate, even when you are having a hatred towards a group or a person, when they've wronged you in some way, oppressed you, you're angry at them, whatever the reason is. God is teaching us that, look, even then, what is just should supersede. You're required to rein in your feelings of revenge and retaliation, and the expectation and the demand is self-restraint, number one, and the second, a proactive establishment of justice, even towards those who are hostile and belligerent. And this is something we can learn from today, even in the current context of what is happening. There's a beautiful quote that I quoted Imam Ghazali. Imam Ghazali is a great philosopher and thinker, and what his idea of social justice was. And he said in his book, justice is to put a thing in its proper place, which is to say, justice is to give each thing its due at its due time, its due place, and its due measure. So this sort of goes back to our idea currently. We're talking about Black Lives Matter, and in the context of the current events, and then people say, well, all lives matter. Well, yes, we get it. All lives do matter. But here's this concept that espouses to say is to give each thing its due at its due time. So when a house is burning down, you don't go knock on every house in the street and say, are you okay? The due time and the due place is the house that's burning. So I think this kind of idea of justice is very, very appropriate to the discussions we're having today. I'm going to briefly touch on race equality. I think it is very clear in Islam, as it is in all the Abrahamic faiths like Christianity and Judaism, that race really is no marker at all. And God tells us in the Quran that he created us from men and women, males and females, which have children, and made us in people and tribes so we may know each other. So God is saying, look, I did this. I created you in different races, different types of people, different languages. So you get to know something, that you understand diversity, you understand culture. And then God says that the most noble of you in my sight is one of you is the most righteous. So your race, your creed, your culture is not the standard. The standard is that whoever is noble in the eyes of God, whoever is the most righteous. So race really is not a standard of any sort in the eyes of God. It is a way God created us, and it is the way that we learn from each other about each other. So there is no superiority of a race or a tribe or a language in the aspects of Islam. Islam is really a race. Like, there is no race to be defined in Islam, and the Quran doesn't even mention races. And if you look at the Arab tribes as Islam, in the beginning of Islam, this is 600 AD Arabia, Arabian desert. And you look at the concepts of slavery, they're not even in conjunction with our modern concepts of slavery in the United States, for example, where the construct of slavery is around a nation of African slaves that have been transported from Africa to the United States. And, these are African American or Black people. In ancient Arabia, or not even ancient, 600 AD Arabia, most slaves are not Black. There are Black slaves, but slavery is for the poor, the destitute. You were lost, you were found, you were sold. You don't have to be Black to be a slave, although there were many Black slaves at the time too. So even in the context of slavery, as Islam starts, slavery is abolished. And there are verses, that compare your ability to free a slave with, your rightful place in heaven. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, espoused these values so much so that his adopted son was somebody who was initially gifted to him as a slave, who he said, look, you're not my slave, you're my son. And the initial call for prayer is assigned to Bilal, there's a movie after too, who's also a Black man, who then eventually becomes the master of the treasuries of the caliphates that are to follow. So despite all these cultural pressures, even in ancient Arabia, freed slaves were given high rank and status in Islamic society to again value that idea that this is a society that doesn't view race, it views merit in front of God. And there's no doubt that in our mind, in at least in modern history, the person who espouses the idea of Islam and race equality is Malcolm X. And this is a beautiful quote from Malcolm X in his book, where he says, during the past 11 years in the Muslim world, I'd eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, slept on the same rug while praying to the same God with fellow Muslims whose eyes were the bluest of blue, hair was the blondest of blonde, skin was the whitest of white. And in the words and the deeds of the white Muslims, I felt the same sincerity that I felt among the Black African Muslims of Nigeria, Sudan, and Ghana. I remember the context there was when certain ideas about Islam and Muslims came about within the Black Muslim society, the idea was to hate the white people who were being racist or oppressive and put them in the same category. And here's Malcolm X saying, look, white Muslims, Black Muslims, we're all sincere in worship to the same God and we do the same things. So there's no black or white here. This is about our dedication towards our societies, our communities, and towards God. So this sort of summarizes the context that we're in today as well, where, you know, when there's such deep-rooted systemic, like I talk about cancer like it's systemic, and systematic like how we are able to sort of advance concepts again and again to the deepest roots, and both of that is sort of ingrained in our society right now, and hopefully as we move forward we correct all those things. So that ends my comments, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Mustafa to talk about gender equality in Islam.
Thank you very much. Okay, can you hear me okay and see my slides? Perfect. So I'm Ree Mustafa. I'm one of the kidney specialists at KU. And I also spend a lot of my time working on research. And I specialize in, my research is in what we call evidence-based medicine. So I really specialize in how to read the literature and to make sense out of it. And I always advocate that we shouldn't be doing things unless we believe it's evidence-based. And I really transformed this thinking to even how I think about Islam and religion. So I will be talking with you today about the gender equality. And when I started thinking, what should I put in this lecture, I really was kind of starting from women in the 7th century Arabia and talking about, you know, women and men, education, women's opinion, property ownership, inheritance and marriage, and then really giving what's happening in our country. I decided 2 days ago that I probably should start by talking about Muslim women roles in society. And with that, I just want to present you with a few pictures of women role models, Muslim women role models in our society currently. And these pictures just represent how Muslim women are quite variable, like any other group of women. And they really have been playing a very active role, whether it's in advocacy, whether it's in social media, research, or you know, supporting the immigrants community and so on. So actually, women, Muslim women have been playing a really, really important role. And many of the activism that happens within the Muslim community is led by great women. If we think about women in pre-Islamic 7th century Arabia, women had very few rights at that point. Even the right of life could be in question. Since it was not uncommon for small girls to be buried alive during the time of scarcity. And part of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ legacy was to end infanticide and establish an explicit right for women. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples about, you know, going from not having the right of life to what was the woman role, again, in the 7th century, after Islam. The first example is a woman called Rufaida al-Aslamiyya. She was an Islamic medical and social worker, recognized as the first female Muslim nurse and surgeon. She really implemented her clinical skills into developing what we can now describe as a mobile care unit. And during military expeditions, she led groups of volunteers that helped the wounded in the battlefield. And because of the great job she and her colleagues did, she actually was assigned equal compensations like soldiers. And again highlighting kind of how Prophet Muhammad and Islam has not only viewed women, but how they were treated. Now, talking about another woman, Khawla bint al-Azwar, she was a Muslim warrior during the life of Prophet Muhammad, and then she has also been described as one of the greatest female military leaders. And in one of the battles, she did lead a group of women against the Byzantine army and defeated its chief commander. So this just gives you an idea that women in Islam, even in early days of Islam, have been equal partners, whether it's in the battlefield or as physicians, nurses, and social workers, and really supporting the mission. When we think about men and women, really Islam teaches that men and women are equal before God. And to me, the one verse that describes this at its highest level is a verse from Quran that says that women and men are created from nafsun wahida. Nafsun wahida means it's from the same soul. And that just highlights this idea of equality. I thought of which order we can talk about different things, and I choose to start by talking about education. I know we'll talk about more about that, but really education, in my view, is a form of property acquisition, because when you are educated, you're exposed to issues of knowing your rights. And both the Quran and Hadith, Prophet Muhammad words, obligate Muslim men and women to acquire knowledge and education. And it is a duty of every Muslim. And in one of the Quran verse, those truly fear Allah among his servants who have knowledge. And one of Prophet Muhammad's hadith talking about seeking knowledge is a duty of every Muslim man and woman, and seeking knowledge from the cradle to the grave. To me personally, I think I am where I am today because I've been very privileged to have grown up in a family that truly treated all the girls in my family equally and valued education quite a bit. This is a picture of my parents who chose to fly like a 15 hours flight just to attend my master's graduation. And it just highlighted the importance of education. And my parents, always stressed the importance of Islamic teaching in our lives. And I just, as a proud mom, this is my son now, who is one of the 2020 graduate this year, which none of us will forget. I think another really important thing in Islam is how women's opinions are weighed heavily. So beginning from the time of Prophet Muhammad's marriage to his first wife, Khadija, a woman played a really important role in his religious career. Khadija was the first person Prophet Muhammad spoke to about his initial experience of revelation, and she became his first follower and convert to Islam. As she remained his confidant and source of support throughout their entire marriage. And years later, when Prophet Muhammad was absent from Medina, he often recommended that if there is any question, religious question, that they should talk to his wife, Aisha. And even after his death, Aisha became a main source of information about Prophet Muhammad and his life, about medicine, and about poetry. So highlighting how really women's opinion was really important. If we think about property ownership, Islam was the first religion to actually acknowledge the fact that a woman should be given what she earns. And to own a property, this is really significant because in any form, owning a property doesn't only mean owning it, but you have to manage the property. And this management cannot be adequately established in the private space, and that you need to be in the public space. So to me, that also highlights the rights. So owning property is beyond just owning the property, but that women are actually have to be and are expected to be in the public space as well. inheritance is another really important thing. According to Quran, for men is a share of what the parents and close relatives leave, and for women is a share of what the parents and close relatives leave, be it little or much, an obligatory share. Again, Islam was the first religion to give that right and expectation to women with inheritance. I think marriage and divorce is a really important aspect to discuss. So not only that the woman had to have to consent to marriage, but there are so many obligations by the partners. So it is expected in Islam that a partner will treat women well, and there is a hadith says "خيركم خيركم لأهله," meaning that the best of you are the best to their family and wives. The right to separation, so not only divorce, but in Islam there is another right called khula, which is the woman's right to actually separate if she has reason and she just does not want to live with that man anymore, even if it's not an agreed upon divorce. Right to child custody, and the right to remarry after divorce. Before I end, I just want to leave you with few thoughts because really the question, are the rights ensured by Islam enjoyed by Muslim women? Not in every place, and it's really variable. And I'm happy to talk about this more in the question and answer session if anyone is interested. I think the really important thing is there is a lot of unclarity and confusion about the difference between Islam and the tribal cultural traditions, which can be very different, and they are sometimes what is followed in some Islamic countries. And then it's really important, again, highlighting the importance of education in general, but especially for women and girls, is ignorance and misinterpretation of a lot of rules and a lot of Quran verses in Islam is more of an issue of misinterpretation and sometimes an issue of a male dominant culture that derive how we understand these verses, not the issue with the verse itself. I will stop here, and I believe, I'm not sure if it's Dr. Saleh is following.
Is it me or Dr. Taha is next?
Maybe Dr. Taha.
I'll be happy to.
Yeah, I'll be next. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you about this important topic. My name is Muhammad Taha. I'm a hospitalist and associate professor in the Department of Internal Medicine. Have been in Kansas City for more than 17 years and in KU for more than 14 years. My part in this conversation, and I love the format, by the way, I appreciate you working hard on this format, is to talk a little bit about social responsibility towards the poor and needy in Islam. And I would like to start with a couple of quotes. Unfortunately, they're not the most positive quotes, but they highlight the need to have such a conversation because of the lots of ignorance about Islam in general. So the first quote comes from HBO program Real Time with Bill Maher, 2014, with Sam Harris, who's an intellectual and author, said Islam is the mother lode of bad ideas. And I wish we can share some of them not so bad ideas with you about Islam today. Obviously, that's an explicit bias against Islam. There is a lot of implicit bias against Islam as well. In a quote from John McCain during a town hall meeting in 2008, when he was asked by a woman in the attendance that Obama is an Arab and a Muslim and I cannot trust him, what do you think? And he said, no, ma'am, he's a decent family man, he's a citizen. And everybody was praising McCain, you know, that's great, he's defending Obama. But I mean, what if he was a Muslim? I mean, does that become he wouldn't be a decent family man? Some of those quotes highlight that we need to do more outreach. And this is on us as Muslims first as well. Not because bias happen when there's ignorance. So I would like to share with you some concepts about social responsibility in Islam. And I would like to start with the concept of wealth and poverty in Islam. Maybe those are unique. Maybe other religions also share the same concept. I don't claim I'm a scholar of comparative religions, but I find them very inspiring. That person who is a wealthy or has wealth, he's a guardian of that wealth. He's not necessarily the owner of that wealth. What that means, your use of the wealth in a good ways is basically what left for you. It's not when you die, what's your balance sheet? That's not the wealth. Whatever the real wealth is, whatever you have used for good causes, basically. And all wealth comes, by design of the creator. What that means that it's not because you're the smartest. It's not because you're the best person in earning. You worked hard, but it's not only because you worked hard you have that wealth. This is basically a test from the creator. He gave you that money and wealth, and he wants to see how do you use it, basically. So this is not a privilege. This is actually a test for you, and you will be held accountable on the day of judgment in the Islamic perspective. How did you spend your wealth? What did you do with it? Was it a good causes? Did you listen to the suffering of others and spend your money in a good way or not? And because of these concepts, there is no stigmata for poverty in Islam. So people who are destined to be poor, it's not because they're lazy. It's not because they don't want to work. In most cases, the Islam view that this is more an opportunity that hasn't been probably provided for them. And Islam has a lot of texts, and I'm happy to share some of that with you, that say that poor people sometimes closer to the creator and do not have as much as burden to share in terms of spending their wealth in good causes, because they just don't have it. And it's easily for the poor person to enter paradise or heaven just because he doesn't have as much responsibility. So what about practice? What Muslims do in practice to provide social support? All Muslims are mandated to pay 2.5% of their total savings, including everything they have, stocks, for example, 401k, annually. Every year, 2.5% of that should go to charity. Here, charity should go to the poor people. This is not your church contribution. This is 2.5% of your wealth that you have to spend and give it to somebody in need to improve their life. This is the minimum, and there is sometimes right more than that if there is more poverty of the community. So you have to pay even more than that. Muslims do fast one month in the year, in month of Ramadan. What do? They fast from dawn to the sunset. So fasting, it's a way to experience the suffering of the poor. And it's mandatory. No matter how much food you have, you can have a food for several months when, in your house. You still have to fast and experience hunger. And that's a way to feel the pain of others who cannot have the same means. In Islam, supporting neighbors who's in need and relatives has a priority. This is very, very important. Also, the orphans is priority in the society. I would like to highlight a couple of Islamic texts. Those both are quotes from Prophet Muhammad. The first quote, he's not a believer whose stomach is filled while his neighbor goes hungry. He's not a believer. So that's a strong quote. And obviously your neighbor doesn't have to be from the same religion or same race or anything like that. Your neighbor, this is defined. The other quote, that the person who sponsors an orphan and pay for his needs, obviously, will be next to me in heaven. So his status would be as the status of prophets in heaven, just because he sponsors an orphan. So it doesn't stop about donating and contribution, but also you have to provide, you have to help no matter what your profession is. I'm going to share a picture of the Mercy Health Free Clinic, one of two Muslim established clinic in Kansas City metro area. There's around 20 safety net clinic in Kansas City metro area. 2 of them has been established and operated by Muslim volunteers. So I will end on not so heavy notes. So please, if you see a Muslim pray in public and he's kneeling and he doesn't answer your request, are you okay? Because this happened to me, and people thought, you know, I'm having a seizure or I'm having a stroke. This is normal. You know, we do pray. Sometimes there is no chapel close. We have to catch our prayer because we pray 5 times a day. And a lot of people come and say like, are you okay? And when you don't speak, they get scared. So I just want to share that with you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I will turn it to Dr. Saleh.
Thank you, Dr. Taha. And can you all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you all for your time, taking the time to attend this session. And also thank you for the organizer of the session. What I'm going to talk about is kind of looking at the subject from the educational angle and how much Islam focuses on education. My name is Habib Saleh. I'm the Chief of Medical Physics with the Department of Radiation Oncology and the Cancer Center. Quran was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, over more than 1400 years ago. There are almost 78,000. There are exactly 77,934 words in Quran. The first word that was actually revealed to the Prophet was the word weed. This is the Arabic version of it. This is the English conversion of it. This is the word. And that tells us how much emphasis is there on Islam, on education. In fact, acquisition of knowledge is a binding on all Muslims, both men and women, without any discrimination. And I highlighted the word binding and underlined it as well. From an Islamic point of view, when we say something binding, it's become almost like a religious obligation. It's a must-do type of task. Even the word Quran literally means reading or reciting, basically. And in the next few slides, because obviously there were so many emphases in education for both men and women. In the next slide, I will go over the achievements of a Muslim scholar throughout the history. And there is a really surprise. It was actually a surprise to me when I was searching this subject about also the role of women in Islamic education. So the first ever a public school system, kind of like equivalent to school district in today's world, was actually established during the Abbasid state in Baghdad in the year 1066, almost like 1,000 years ago. These are some pictures of that building. I mean, we all know that the concept of education existed during the ancient Egypt, Babylon, China, Greek, and India. However, as an organized public school system, where became like almost like in today's school district was established at that time in Baghdad in 1066, and within 30 years, that school actually housed 3,000 people. And in fact, it became almost like a boarding school, where they had even dormitory where people come from faraway places and can attend school. And then it spread out to multiple cities. In fact, there are approximately, well, at that time, it spread out to 8 different major cities throughout the Islamic world. That building, I also happen to be from Iraq and particularly from Baghdad. This is actually the building, the current status. It was renovated throughout in the last 50 years to reflect the Islamic architecture and also how it looked like 1,000 years ago. And it became also a place where people could have musical activities and also a place to visit as well. It's on the bank of the Tigris River. I had the pleasure of actually visiting it myself. And then next thing is university. And this is really, like I was saying earlier, it was even educational for me. The word first and actually continued operation university was founded by a Muslim woman. And that was in 1859, more than almost like 1150 years ago. And that university actually still exists in Fez, Morocco. The name of the lady is Fatima al-Farhi, which is who was married to a rich person, and that person died, and then she and her sister inherit the wealth and used it to build an educational system, which gives actually degree, and that university still exists until now. Just for comparison purposes, the University of Bologna in Italy was founded in 1088, which is considered the oldest school in Europe. That university still actually, Morocco kept renovating and improving that building. It's called Al-Qarawiyyin University. Here are some inventions. While I was going through this topic, and there are certain things I discovered myself that I was not aware. That Muslim invented would change the world, actually. The first one is coffee. I mean, we all love coffee, and we know the story of the shepherd whose goat accidentally ate the coffee bean trees in Ethiopia and in Yemen. And the Yemenis has a long history of a trade having a very long cost, and they had a trade with many parts of the world. So the Yemeni developed this beans into a drink. It was actually a popular drink in Yemen during the 15th century, almost like 700 years ago. And then Yemen has very active trading with Europe, and they brought coffee to Europe, and that's how it spread. The other major invention that was invented by Muslims are the algebra. Algebra was developed by Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. He is a Muslim mathematician who lived in Persia and in Iraq approximately 1200 years ago. In fact, the word algorithm, in Arabic, the word algorithm and Khwarizmi, it's kind of similar. The original of the word algorithm coming from his name. And in addition to algebra, the number system, which is currently the foundation of mathematics, was one of the contribution of the Muslim civilization. Degree granting university we spoke earlier about, which is again still until this today it's a regular university. Other invention is the cameras. We from a physics standpoint, the idea of capturing to create an image. We capture a light from a scene, then we create an image from it, and then reproduce the image. Of course, in order to do this, we need we need the lenses, and we need the optics for it. The field of optics, of physics of optics, actually was invented by a Muslim scientist. His name is Ibn al-Haytham. And that's what has led to actually to the field of photography. Other invention is things like paper mill, alcohol distillation, etc., etc. There are actually, if you go to Wikipedia, you will find for each field of science there is a list of Muslim scientists during the medieval era. So with that, I conclude and will be happy to take any questions when time will start. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone in the presentation. There's a lot of chat in the chat box, and mostly a lot of comments about the presentations and and how informative those have been. So we're very grateful to you for that. I'd like to shift to some questions, and I know that sometimes it can be difficult to discuss situations that aren't always so pleasant. So what you've presented is some really amazing information. It really looks at all the positive being a Muslim and the contributions to society and culture and science. But we know that there are a lot of biases and unconscious biases against Muslims. And I'm curious, from your perspective, like when were you first aware that people had a bias against your religion, something that you know is beautiful and wonderful? Like, how old were you, and what did you think when you first became aware? You know, what were your thoughts and feelings about that?
I can try to respond to that. Actually, part in my life, not my whole life, we traveled with my family quite a bit. And that just gave me that really different perspective and awareness. So we lived in Muslim countries and we lived in Western countries. And I have to say, the time where I first kind of completely realized it was after 9/11 in the United States. Traveling before that, there were always, you know, some awareness of it, but it wasn't as obvious. And it's during that time when I completely chose to wear hijab. And I come from a family that we have all kinds of, you know, my own sister doesn't wear hijab. So it was completely by choice. And like my kids describe it to me now, is Mama, you start from a different starting point than everybody else. You start way behind and you have to work hard to get the same starting point to prove that you're a good person first. And then you can kind of start the race. And I think that's a very true analogy. I do think how much time it takes for you to get the starting point like everybody else depends a lot on the amount of misperceptions that the person in front of you have, it's easier to talk to people who know nothing. It is harder to try to convince people who already have some beliefs that are negative. But I do believe that we all have to start with conversations. And there is one question that asks about resources, which is a great question. I want to say, really, people who are not interested, and they're going to always find the resources that we all do. You know, we find the resources that feed into our own beliefs. I do think trying to introduce people to Muslims around you, and just many people I know, when I ask them, like, how many Muslims have you met? And they're like, you're the first. I'm like, actually, I'm not. You know, this person, and they're a Muslim, but they just maybe choose not to wear hijab, or you don't know. So I don't know if anyone has anything else they want to add.
Yeah, I want to add one thing. You know, I'm not sure how many people know that the first university ever was established by an Islamic place, and also by a Muslim woman, and most people don't know. And part of the reason is because, unfortunately, in the media, 90% of the material in the media are negative about Islam and Muslim, and that actually, I agree with Dr. Mustafa. We start feeling it after 9/11, but actually existed long time ago. I mean, probably before then, but then there was a boost, 9/11, and also last few years there was also another boost.
You know, I wanted to just comment that I happen to know about the university because I had a student from that area in Morocco. So it is a really interesting fact. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is Gerald, and so I want to thank you, Dr. Mobin, Dr. Mustafa, Dr. Daha, and Dr. Salah. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I learned a lot. It flowed well, and it was a lot of great information in there. And so I want to ask one of the questions that Kim Connolly sent, and it says, so we understand and avoid unintentionally offending our Muslim friends, can you share a question that you often get asked about being Muslim that is hurtful or makes you frustrated?
Can I take this? So you may be surprised, but I'm talking from personal experience. I love when people ask me questions. The problem, I think, having less conversation is worse than having conversation. So most people, to be honest with you, they avoid ask you anything about your faith. And even if they have misconception, they don't reach out to Muslims to ask, you know, what they think about what they heard in certain media outlet. And the first time I experienced, you know, there's a lot of misconceptions about Islam. When I hear about Islam in media, sometimes I don't recognize this religion that we're talking about, and I feel, wow, this is awful. I mean, this religion has to be awful. Why are they talking about it this way? I mean, it made me a better person, but nobody asked me, for example, as a person about this. So I will leave others to respond to this as well, but maybe they have the similar experience. To me, I had very positive encounters, colleagues and students, residents and patients. But sometimes the lack of communication is the problem. And, you know, they're asking you a question they felt, you know, was judging you, for example.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Taha on that. I don't think, for many of us, especially in a forum like this, or those of us who are, you know, used to wearing our faith, talking about our faith, and I've sort of retreated as a result of a lot of incidents around us to learning and more about our faith so we can actually articulate it better. Don't mind questions, and I don't think much insults me or disappoints me anymore, because I think if your leaders can say it, and then the common person says it, then you know, it's all the same. It doesn't really have a differentiation anymore. I think for me, what's changed over a period of time, and I'm raised in this country. I don't consider myself an immigrant. I can pass for Mexican or Muslim any day. So I've faced it from all of those angles, and most of my experiences have been very positive in this world, thank God. But I think I've changed my approach to please accept me, to please respect me as a Muslim. So it's one thing to say, we have equal rights for religion in this country, and you have the right to practice your faith. I have the right to practice mine. Of course, that's the baseline human sort of dignity that we can offer each other. I think my approach now and my sense now is I don't want to be just accepted as, okay, you have the right to do this, go ahead. I want people around me, my colleagues, my friends, my communities, my neighbors, to respect me for my faith, because I feel it offers a level of maturity, advanced thinking, care, extension of dignity, humanism, forward thinking, inclusiveness. That's where I want to be viewed by my friends, by my neighbors, by everybody around me, and not just me personally, Muslims and Muslim people. I think we want to be viewed like that. We just don't want to be accepted. Okay, you're here, these are your rights. Please extend us that opportunity to articulate the maturity of our faith, of our understanding of humanity, of lives in general. So that's become my perspective now.
Yeah, and I fully support. I think the hardest part for me is when I'm interacting with people for a year, like a neighbor for 2 years, and then they ask you a question. And I'm like, you could have asked this question 2 years ago and saved yourself 2 years of being confused. But I don't think, even conversations that are hard, I'd rather have them and just at least be aware of what the questions are. I certainly have learned and read much more after some conversation to be able to articulate better, but questions are usually not offensive. They're better than now communication, for sure. The question I get asked a lot about is my hijab and how oppressed I am. And
Dr. Mustafa, I love the analogy you gave to when there's a unconscious or maybe even conscious bias against someone, how you're starting behind in the race and you have to do so much to prove just that you're a good person. And I think that we are really seeing this a lot within the Black community, and how it feels like people start so far behind and have to prove so much just to have basic rights. And I know Dr. Mirza, you really touched on this really well in your presentation. I don't know if you can say any more about that. There seems to be solidarity perhaps with the Black community. Have there been any official statements from any of your religious leaders relative to this?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's been plenty of solidarity for two reasons. One, as Muslims and as people of faith, we, as we reviewed in the presentation, the whole idea of having racism is very un-Islamic and very, against the core of our being as Muslims. So on a very human level, it bothers us. And also, America, the United States of America, has a large population of Black Muslims. So this is not only like an idea for humanity, for my colleagues and things like that, but some of my best friends are Black Muslims. These are people who pray right next to me. These are people who I've, studied with, grown up with. So it really touches us even more deeper than that, because these are communities that are attached to us. These are communities that we are part of, that we serve, and we don't see ourselves separate from that. And yes, there have been many statements of solidarity, both from national organizations like the Islamic Society of North America, the Fifth Council of North America, CARE, which is the Council of American Islamic Relations, who have made a lot of effort in creating solidarity, organizing dialogue, protests, things like that. So yes, this is very close to us. And we talk a lot about how Islamophobia, racism affects even Muslims, but this is, it affects us, yes, and it's a big problem in the world and in this country, but it is not anywhere close to what the Black American experience is in the United States. When I go for a job interview, people are gonna maybe not like me for my beard or whatever, but they're not gonna think that I walked in the store to rob them, or I'm not qualified for my job or something like that. I have not experienced that level of racism, which my friends have experienced, because they are looked with the crooked eye, and if somebody's walking past them, they'll lock their door. I've seen those experiences live growing up in Los Angeles, so I know how that feels, not from a personal standpoint, but from the person sitting next to me standpoint. So I think that goes very deep into our society, and this whole idea of where you start in life is lost upon a lot of us because we haven't seen it and we ignore it.
Yeah.
Dr. Mirza, how do you support your Black colleagues and friends who experience these things? That's one of the questions that we'll be talking about tomorrow, not tomorrow, but Thursday in the town hall, is how can non-Black individuals be supportive of those of us who are in the Black African-American community who experience such racism and such inequity and so many things, being fatally shot, murdered, lynched in this country still today. How do you personally support your colleagues? What is it that you do to support us?
Yeah, excellent question. And I wish I did more. So there's a lot of introspection for me in this question. I think the thing that I can do best and that I feel like I do well is engage with my other colleagues who are non-Black and bring up these uncomfortable conversations with them in the operating room, for example. And it gets uncomfortable for people to talk about these things because they don't want to touch on sensitive issues in the workplace. And sometimes it's taboo because you're going to get reported, right, for talking about things like that. So I am very vocal about it. And I start my OR days, we spend 8-10 hours operating. So you've got people's undivided attention. I mean, you're the surgeon, everybody's listening.
Right.
So if you talk to the techs in my room, the nurses in my room, the students, the residents who come in, they know that there's going to be a mini lecture series on something about issues that are going on. So we've talked extensively about these things and about analogies and, counter arguments about, all lives matter, burning houses. We've talked
That's a
about,
great one.
We've talked, and, my PE coach did this with us in high school, and I've seen videos about this where he lined everybody up on the same line and he said, okay, if you grew up with 2 parents, step 10 feet ahead, and so on and so on. And by the time he read all these things, some people were already at the finish line, and you looked at your friends who were behind you and he said, okay, well, I didn't even know that this guy didn't have a dad at home, right? So we need to bring up these ideas so people can understand that my Black friend who is a drug addict, didn't get there because it was solely his choice. He got there because that's all he saw. When he was 10, somebody handed him heroin, right? Because he grew up in that neighborhood. He didn't have a role model. He didn't have a book at school. He didn't have a teacher who cared. And I think people need to understand these concepts more and more, understand how systematic this problem is. It's just not what I see with my eyes, but this goes down to our banking policies, our property policies, our, what your HOA does. So I feel that my place is to disseminate this information. And I feel like I have a very good platform because people listen to me. I'm very active in the community at the Islamic Center level. I just emailed you about organizing an event because I want you to be a panelist on that. So we're doing things like that. And I think that's what non-Black people can do to help their Black friends. And when you walk on the street and somebody respects you or knows you well, and you walk holding somebody else's hand that they may not have respected before, that level of equality, that visibility makes it so much better and acceptable to somebody who was just on the fence and couldn't figure it out.
Well, where you been, Dr. Mirza?
I know. I was going to say, I have to say, I think it's really important to say this. It really takes someone with strength to speak the way you do, and to talk about topics. Listen, we're not supposed to talk about them, but they happen at the workplace. That's what's wrong. It happens, but we're not supposed to address them or talk about them. So God, bless you. And I just kudos to you for your strength. For all of you.
Not everybody is at Dr. Mirza and my level or other people's level who are able to speak up. And so we still respect those individuals. Absolutely. Because we get it. It's not easy to do, but we do it. But for those of you who can't, we want to figure out ways where you can be socially accountable at whichever level you're comfortable with. And that's the goal.
And today shows there's a lot of people who are interested in learning. We had almost 60 people on today, And the chat is full of asking for resources and saying that they want to know more about Islam and Muslim people. And so there is this desire to understand and to interact and interface and to have conversations and to ask the questions, even the difficult ones that make us uncomfortable, right?
Yep.
So this has been very, very positive, and I hope you all have noticed the chat, noticed the positive comments and the compliments to your words and your information. And I would just simply suggest that we have another one of these very soon. Maybe, similar, but maybe some, additional information if you're willing to do that, because there's so much interest in this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. It's past 1 o'clock, so we probably all need to go. But that just shows that it was a great conversation, and everyone who hung on are really interested. So thank you so much. And I got a feeling you'll be back. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was great. We
And
appreciate
Dr. Mustafa, you answered all of the questions about gender and women and suppression and all of that. So I didn't really need to ask those questions because you talked about it in your presentation so eloquently. So thank you for that.
I'll be more than happy to have a conversation about Muslim women support to the Black community specifically.
Okay.
And
Great.
Thank you,
conversations
Dr.
with our kids.
Taha.
Okay,
Thank you so much. Okay,
Thank you,
bye-bye.
Dr. Taha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Geraldine, this is Emed.
Yes.
I just wanted to, Geraldine and Kimberly, thank you so much for setting this up and, giving us as Muslims or, an opportunity to speak. I really love the panelists and what they said. So I just wanted to thank you again. I definitely hope we do this again. And I think it helps support one another, especially with what's going on now. So.
It does, you're right. And thank you for your support and everyone's support who was online. And I agree that it helps to, to have the conversation, and it helps us to be able to support one another. So it was very timely. And Emed, thank you for all that you do.
Yeah,
Thank you for all that
Of course.
Yes.
Thank you.
I appreciate
Good to
it.
see you.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
to
you,
see you.
Dr. Salah. Thank you for everything you offered today. It was great.
Dr. McGee,
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you, Dr. Sa.
this was fabulous.
Wasn't it great?
Oh my gosh, just fabulous.
Well, we have more. So guess what? We will always invite you. We do these all the time. So I will make sure that that you get an invite. Absolutely.
I'm shamelessly trying to figure out how I might be able to bike this some kind of way or duplicate it here at my university.
Mm-hmm.
More importantly, I hope you noticed that many of your K-Board colleagues were on.
Absolutely.
I saw Dr. Allen, I saw I saw Jennifer for certain. And
yeah, Deetra's still on. And I saw Teresa, yeah.
That's right. I don't know, maybe there's a way that we can make this a statewide dialogue or something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
A statewide conversation about diversity and inclusion. I don't know. It's just fabulous. Just
It
fabulous.
is. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to Kimberly and her crew and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Cabinet. It takes all of us to put this on, and for the speakers to be so the willingness to come and just share, and to be honest, be talking about these things are hard. I got emails. Yeah, they do. I got emails today saying from people, it's hard. I don't want to talk about that on Thursday. This is hard, and we get it. But it can't always be me. And so I appreciate those who do come forward and talk. It is greatly appreciated, and we do not take it for granted. But our campus needs to hear so that we can do.
Mm-hmm.
So
this was just fabulous. Anyway, I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
No, you don't have to be quiet.
No, don't at all.
We'll just keep inviting you. And so I think it would be great for us to talk, Kim and Brian, about how we can broaden this. Because I think it would be best practice.
Easily done with Zoom. So I love that idea.
I do
Definitely.
Too. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Geraldine.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Dr. McGee. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Have a great day.